Okay, let's kick off. The first presentation of this presentation will be in charge of Mr. Chris Dubois. He's fresh food team lead from Circana company, who will present Understanding American Consumers in English. In this presentation, the analyst in chief of the international survey company Circana will analyze the big trends that affect great consumers and American retailers. Chris Dubois is executive vice president of the company. His usual lecture about changing trends in the sector and consumer. His experience is requested by executive leaders of retailers, supermarket chains, and food chains and packaged products. He also collaborates with trade associations of consumer goods sectors, and he's part of councils and directors' boards. Next, we will leave the stage to Mr. Chris Dubois.
Hello, and it is a thrill and an honor to be here today. Thank you to Gustavo and Jensen Group for having me. I'm Chris Dubois. I lead the fresh foods practice at Circana, and produce is near and dear to my heart because if you think about the power of the supermarket, the reason American consumers pick where they shop is almost always produce. So the quality of that supermarket food matters, and grapes are a big part of that. So to see two major producers like Peru and Chile come together in a conference like this and to have such a showing and unbelievable energy in the discussions, I've had a terrific time being here and grateful for everything. Today, I'm going to take you through some of your biggest markets and help you understand consumers in hopefully a new way. So if you think about the work my teams do out there with clients, we work with almost all the major manufacturers, producers. In the food side, we also work with a lot of the big retailers. And our whole focus is to help companies grow. The way we do that is through data, insights, and technology. So here's a very short advertisement, but you're about to see some data and insights on the American market in a way that you probably haven't seen them before. And I want to share a little bit of where the data is coming from because it may be new. So my company goes out and buys retail data from each of the retailers. We see every item sold every day in every food outlet, and we know hundreds of things about it. We see 500 million US frequent shopper cards. We know household and what they purchased. On top of that, we also have 100,000 people who share everything that they buy and also what they eat. So we know what they eat for breakfast, snack, lunch, dinner. Yes, there's weird people who write that down and tell, but you know what? It lends a lot of insight. We also know what happens in the food service side because all the big distributors as well as consumers tell us what they eat at restaurants, but also what the distributors shipped. So today you're going to see insights that in a way that hopefully help you find new growth ideas for the grapes markets in the US. The first set is I'll take you through a little bit of where the consumer's at from a economic side. We'll go through what's working in the US and UK grape markets in particular, but also how Americans buy grapes. In other words, the purchase dynamics at the shelf and in the store, what they eat in their homes and when they eat it, how they eat it, with what, and also some ideas in terms of where to grow. So instead of going through 100 to 200 major economic slides and it can get really dry, I focus only on what's going to drive sales at the supermarket, what really matters for the US consumer. So what I'm going to do is set the context for why the American economy has been pretty strong, but also why supermarket sales have been strong recently. So if you think about the dynamics of it, if you're listening to American cable TV, honestly, I wish you all the best of luck trying to figure out what's going on because American TV is totally nuts. But if you look at the stats in terms of what's driving the economy, you wouldn't be surprised to see the economy continues to be strong. The population continues to grow at a small pace. As the population expands, it means more people are buying, so volume's going up. Unemployment rate has been right around 4%. When people work, and when you see retail sales going up, in fact, over the last year, it's been about 2 to 3%. When they're working and spending money, it's really hard to be in a recession. So if you're watching U.S. television, you'll hear talk about recessions. What's been interesting is underneath the economy, it's been really kind of strong, and that's why you're going to see some pretty strong sales numbers on the food side. The story for America in the last couple of years has been inflation. If you're on the grocery side, if you're a U.S. consumer on the grocery side, you're seeing your bills up about 30% on average. So now it's over the last 5 years. So that's a big deal. In other words, somebody who used to spend $100 a week now spends $130. And that's a big change in 5 years. Right now you're seeing inflation come down. So as long as inflation moderates, unemployment's down, you're going to see the U.S. economy continue to be strong. Part of the inflation side has been the difference between what we call at home or food purchased at the supermarket versus food purchased in food service. When you think about where inflation's been in the last 2 years in particular, it's been very heavily in U.S. food service. So restaurant prices, if you go out to eat in America, feel really high. And so when we kind of turn that back into what do Americans spend per meal, per person, per eating occasion? Again, if you take all the data that we have, it comes out in 2023 about $1.88 in US dollars per person per meal at home. If you went out to eat, you'd be spending about $8. You can see the rise of that food service side in terms of the red bar going up. It's gone up quite a bit from 5 to well over 6 now on that side. So the inflation side is hit very, very hard, but retail food in the supermarkets, still very strong, still has a huge cost advantage. The number one factor that drives supermarket sales in terms of driving long-term growth has been the number of people in the workforce. So we correlate hundreds of variables. We do forecasts for manufacturers every year and retailers. The number one factor that comes out is the number of prime age working people, 25 to 54. And right now you're seeing more people at work in America than's been in the last 20 years in that age bracket. So will things continue to be strong? The answer is yes. So current set, the American consumer is strong, your markets are strong there. There are 3 things that I talk about with manufacturers and retailers almost every week on these topics, and it continues to come up because these are things that are going to matter in the next 10 years. I'm not going to go into each one, but I wanted to highlight some of these because it's a big part of, as you plan your businesses, what's going on in America that's going to change in a very big way. So one of the big things we've seen is since COVID, people don't go into the office as much. In fact, about 30% of the US workforce now works from home primarily. So what does that mean? That lets people move to different cities. So you're seeing a move to the south and west across a lot of different cities. So I was with an executive leadership team planning out next year's 2025 budget a little bit. And as you looked at the population shift and where they were putting their marketing dollars, they were putting marketing dollars in the old cities where population used to be. Their key audience had moved to a lot of the South, including Florida, the Carolinas, and different places like that. So think about the marketing spend. This impact will be a very big deal over the next decade. Hispanic population growth. Hispanics will be the largest racial segment in the next 10 years. That's a very big deal in America. I'm not going to go into any kind of politics or anything else like that. That's not what this is about. But the fact is, for people who understand that segment and can market to it, they're going to win in a very big way, and it's going to change. The other major change, what I call changing of the guard, is baby boomers were a very large demographic. There are a lot of people in the older generation from 1946 to 1962, and they dominated U.S. retail. In fact, dominated U.S. food. So if you ever wanted to do heavy marketing, you're going to market to that audience. Right now, millennials and Gen Z, younger generations from, say, 1982 up to 1998 and 1998 to current, those two generations are much bigger than the baby boomers, and they're about to take over the U.S. grocery store. So if you win with the younger consumers in a big way, you have an outstanding chance to win. You're going to see the U.S. supermarket look very, very different as a result in the next 10 years. But let's talk about the U.S. and U.K. grape markets. One of the first things that you'll want to understand up front is where does the American dollar go? So if I take my wallet out and said, I'm going to go buy a week's worth of food, including restaurant and grocery, 60% of my wallet goes over to the supermarket. That's food at home. About 40% of my wallet would go to food service. Restaurant costs cost more. So that becomes a big piece of where that goes. But the other side is when you think about eating occasions mean breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacking. When you think about where do Americans get the food for all their different eating occasions, 87% are sourced from home. So that means even if I'm in the office and I brought a lunch, that was sourced from home. So think about the value and the importance of kind of getting that right at retail and making sure the spending is there. 13% of eating occasions are sourced away. So this is sort of, if you think about it, where Americans eat and how they eat it. But let's get into some statistics just to give you a feel of what's going on, because we'll start getting into the grape markets very, very quickly. As you look across the U.S. stores over the last year, each of the departments has been pretty strong with the exception of seafood. Produce continues to be really strong and growing at 3.2%. It's almost $100 billion, which is huge in the U.S. retail. Produce alone is bigger than many different retail segments. Meat, produce, and deli in particular have been growing pretty fast over the last 2 years, but up 3.2% is very strong in a tough world of retail. If you look at the U.S. and U.K. fruit markets, I've separated this out into fruit and grapes so you can begin to see where the changes are going. U.K. markets here, we kind of measure that in the UK currency. US is US dollars in terms of sales. But you can begin to see, again, dollars are growing for both fruit up there, but also in volume and units, which is powerful. Grapes have had a very good year overall as well. In fact, if you kind of dig into dollar sales for grapes here in particular, what I've lined out here are some of the top 5 categories. Grapes have had a phenomenal year so far this year, tracking back to it. So and we're going to go into a little bit of that in terms of why grapes have been so strong here in the U.S. Quick hint is social media. Yeah, but what you're seeing here is berries have been strong for many, many years. Apples are having a little bit tougher year. If you think about what matters in the U.S. markets, it's all about red and green grapes. So not a shock. You're growing them, so you know where it's going. But what we're seeing is blue and black continue to be strong growers all the way through. But one of the things that caught my eye about 2.5 years ago, was cotton candy, because it continues to grow at a ridiculously fast pace. When you think of cotton candy grapes, they're about 5% of the U.S. market. But when you think about a small item that's growing almost 26%, and it's not showing any signs of stopping, all I can say is please continue to grow cotton candy grapes because A, they taste great, but wow, are they selling. So if you think about how to continue to drive growth, different flavors, different forms, colors, all that really matters in terms of pushing it up. One of the speakers a couple hours earlier had talked about social media driving grapes, and this has been a really big deal. So if you think about grape sales in the U.S. just in 2024, we're up 17%. I mean, this is crazy, crazy numbers for an agricultural product. And part of that is being driven by social media. So the whole idea of people freezing putting lime juice on grapes, sprinkling it in Jell-O, freezing it, and having that as frozen candy. 12 huge sour grape and other sweet grape trends on TikTok, and it's exploding. And guess who's really paying attention? It's the younger generation. So if I had to think about which fruits are winning, technically it's grapes in a really big way, because not only is it making it fun for younger consumers, but realistically, you're driving big sales. But Gen Z dollars up 46%, all about making more trips to the store for grapes. So can social media work? The answer is absolutely yes. So one of the questions I'd had up front was help share some of the information around packaging. So the US is still a little bit behind. I think there's a huge opportunity to upgrade convenience in terms of packaging. Bag sales right now are continuing to drive it. It's probably been the case for a very, very long time. Clamshell is about flat. If you think about one of the biggest drivers in the US market is all about convenience and portability. The more you make your product transportable, simple, easy, convenient, the more you're going to sell. And we show that across the store. It happens in the meat department. It happens in the deli department. It happens in the center store areas. So overall, right now, bag still works. It is total, and you've got a tremendous product. But the more you can drive convenience matters. One of the other big questions we always get is organic going to grow? Will organic make a big difference? So here is the organic dollar share of produce. So how you'd read this is it varies between 11.64 and 12% of total grapes on that, or total produce on that side. So organic runs about that. Organic still has a pretty strong volume share as well. So volume, it's continued to push up. So it's growing, but growing slowly on that side. The grape share is a little bit less. So when you kind of think about it from that side, there still is room to grow organic grapes. It just hasn't really kind of caught on yet. So to me, I think there's some real headroom here to be able to grow organic grapes and kind of capture the imagination. Part of it is it's not about pricing. So if I think about the pain inside cereal manufacturers, ketchup manufacturers, yogurt, there are so many categories now in the U.S. supermarket that are up 30 or 50%, and they're really feeling it from a volume side. What we've seen is most price increases over the last 5 years are less than 20%. So the way you'd read this is if the price back in 2019 was at 100, this is where we're at today. So plums are 17% higher, peaches are 17% higher, grapes are 16% higher. I'm not telling you to raise prices. All I'm saying is pricing is not holding it back. In fact, I think this is one of the big reasons why produce has had such a successful run over the last few years. When I look at opportunities for promotion, does grapes get the same kind of credit as other fruits from retailers? So one of the ways we look at it is grocery ads in terms of what items are on the front page, what items are on the back page of a lot of the grocery ads. And what we see here is apples in particular and berries get a lot of feature activity. If I'm trying to influence a retailer, I would start looking at the grape, all the success grapes have had on sales, but there's a lot of room to increase ad space. So encouraging retailers to market more, present more, is going to help drive your sales, because I think grapes could benefit from even more exposure in those circulars. One of the things to keep in mind is a lot of times, and I'm kind of guilty of that because I grew up around grocery, is we think of the American supermarket primarily as the main driver. What we're seeing today in the last few years has been one of the most radical shifts. Normally this chart does not have anything over, say, 0.3 or 0.4 on a change. You don't see a $1 trillion market separate and segment that much. But what we're seeing now is club stores and mass stores. So think Walmart and Target. For club, think Costco and Sam's. So these stores, along with Aldi, are growing much faster than traditional groceries. So you're seeing volume come out of the traditional supermarkets. Huge growth in terms of Walmart and Target. So when you think about where you're trying to sell, don't forget about those stores. Don't underestimate the power of those channels. When you shift your focus, you will drive and win sales in a much bigger way. So I've talked a lot about retail in terms of supermarkets, club, mass merch. What about out-of-home markets? Because not everybody sells into retail, and I get that. So we look at food service in two different ways. So one is called commercial food service on the left, and that's about 80% of the market. Out of 88 billion visits in the US, 80% of that goes through restaurants and convenience stores. So think about normal restaurants, everything from fancy down to casual diners, and convenience stores, which may or may not have gas. Non-commercial food service is going to be more institutional. Think schools, for example, is a great place, especially for grapes. So you can see the difference in share. Right now, the big commercial food service, restaurants are hurting. Yeah, part of that was from inflation driving, but also a big part of this is going to be, the fact that food at home has been very inexpensive for a while, and people are still eating at home, cooking at home, and doing that. Fruit in food service, fruit's growing though. You'd think fruit may not be growing in a way, but it's growing about 6% a year. When I look at the number of servings though, it's only on 2% of orders. So fruit's important, but there's still an awful lot of room for growth. When I think about grapes, it's one of the most popular categories in the US supermarket. A US supermarket's not going to stand up a produce department without it. But here, if I look at broadline distributors, and those are the Sysco's, US Food Service, those are the ones that get it out to restaurants. Grapes are only the number 9 fruit. So there's a lot of room to continue to push, customize, make those products kind of fit in a way that helps drive success. So food service to me is a big deal, and partially because fruit's growing. It's not like it's holding back. So where do you think about growing? Where are the biggest places to go in terms of where's fruit today? Well, the big thing is secondary school cafeterias. So think high school, older children for the most part. McDonald's is a big one, Chick-fil-A, and college and university cafeterias. Most of the food restaurants are going to be apple slices and fruit cups. If I had to look and see across US food service room for grapes, there's absolutely room for grapes. The question is, what does that product look like for a Chick-fil-A to pick it up? But at the end of the day, this to me just shows a ton of opportunity. So one of the big questions I get is, how do people buy grapes? Help me understand some of the buying behavior. How big is it? How broad is it? So we always kind of start with the first step of, what percent of households buy this kind of a product? Sometimes you'll see 12, sometimes you'll see 20. It can vary bit by bit. But grapes are bought by almost 3/4 of American households. In other words, it's broad, it's big, it's extended. What we see though is there's still room. I mean, there's no reason the berry people have to be able to get more success. There's room to kind of bring in some new households. It doesn't mean that you're hurting at all. All it tells me is there's still room to grow in this market, and some of that's bringing in new households. Why is that important? It's because when you bring in a household, on average, these households are going to spend about $56 a year. So that's a big deal because it lines up really well compared to almost every other fruit. In fact, it's number 2 on the list. So when you think about how much they're spending per buyer, it's a big deal. But averages hide powerful numbers. So if you think about what really matters, think about who your heavy buyers are. So I use that term very easily, but just imagine in your mind 340 million Americans. Now we're going to rank them top to bottom from purchasing. How much did someone purchase? And technically, my company does it by household, so we're not really going after each and every person. We're going after the household. But just rank them highest to lowest. Now we're going to take the top 10%. That's how you get to 43%. So those households are not everybody. Those households are not just the average person walking down the aisle in Costco. Those are very, very specific households. But if you want to win and you want to grow and you want to get the next flavor into that and help it grow just like cotton candy, you got to know these households. You got to know who these people are. And by the way, it's very knowable by that side. So we can tell you exactly who those are, and we'll get into some of that. When you think about where to purchase it, where are these heavy buyers purchasing? They're buying other items too. So when households buy grapes, what other fruit was in the basket? Where would you put grapes next to if you really wanted to drive sales of grapes, but also other fruits? In other words, if you're talking to a retailer, where's the best place? And trust me, retailers don't often know. They need some help. If I was going to be pushing, I would put it right next to berries on that side. And if you can get it next to the banana table, that's perfect. Why? Because your grape buyers are also buying those products. Make that trip simple, but also don't let people buy bananas and not see the grapes. And swear to God, I've walked 20 stores in the US in the last 2 weeks just sort of testing this out. 8 out of the 20 got it right. So there's room to improve because it's going to help drive sales. The other one is when you think about the number of fresh grape trips, how many include bananas and berries, it's about a third. So there's still room to go. Now we can help find all the fresh grape buyers who are the heavy ones, but here's the ones who are really, here's an overview of the top grape buyers in general. Not a surprise, you're going to be a little bit higher average income. It shouldn't surprise anybody because if you have older kids, you need some income on that side. For the top 10, it's going to be 5+ person households. So what you're seeing is, in particular, those households have a range of kids in there, older to younger, and grapes probably win all the way across. So in other words, you could target stores with those, you can target markets with those, but bringing more of those households in will help drive those sales. The other side is it's also about helping the retailers win. So when you think about grapes and other fruit, one of the questions we always get is, well, how big's if my product's in that basket, how big's the rest of the basket? So grapes win, hands down, when you start kind of pulling out, if I can see grapes in the basket. So when grapes are in the basket, that average basket is worth $99.47 to a retailer. That's a very big difference between melons, for example. So if you're trying to sell grapes versus melons, one of the things you'd say to a retailer is, I bring customers who spend more in your store. So that becomes a very, very big deal in terms of how they're buying it. When you think about how people consume at home and think of when they're eating grapes, 79% are consumed at home in general, but 74% are consumed during the week. It's much more of a weekday snack. When we break down breakfast, lunch, dinner, and between meals, it comes out 57% between meals. So if you think about what's an American snack, grapes is a big part of that. And not surprisingly, it comes out as a snack or a dessert. So why is that? Well, let's talk about breakfast first, and then we're going to go into why this really, really matters, and also what creates another area for growth. For Americans, most breakfast occasions are sourced at home. It's a very quick routine. It's very routinized. You're not going to get an American to really break a whole lot. If they're eating yogurt in the morning, they're eating yogurt. If they're eating cereal, they're doing cereal. If it's eggs, bacon, or fruit, you've got it. So in terms of when they go away from home, they're generally going to be able to buy something at a Starbucks or McDonald's. That's called, and take it away, that's off premise. So a big part of this is either they're sourcing at home or taking it with them. But we also track morning snacks. We also track snacks all the way through. And if you look at what's growing at food service, morning snacks are growing. So if you think about grapes are supposed to be a great snack item, and morning snacks are growing at food service. If you look on the right side, breakfast, AM snack, and brunch. Breakfast is down, but AM snack is up. There's a huge opportunity to get grapes in at food service, but position around that morning snack. One, because that's how people eat it at home. Two, you've got a natural growth opportunity. So one is, this becomes a very big avenue to continue to drive growth. Lunch is also another big opportunity. If you think about what really matters for lunch, most lunches in America take less than 10 minutes to prepare, so done very, very quickly. Again, 30% of the population, or 30% of the working age population is working from home, so it's going to be a fast lunch. Convenience is key. So is portability. So when Americans are going to the office, 50% of their lunches are carried from home. So that's a big deal. In other words, you're bringing something from home to go. And then a natural bit is to fit it with a sandwich or the salad that goes through. But this is all about convenience. If you think about packaging, if you think about portability, it's more than just a bag. Think about what that product looks like to solve it, but also think about how you want to communicate it. because grocery circulars are increasingly becoming less important, the newspaper part of it. So in America, traditionally newspaper ads or ads are dropped into newspapers or into the mail, and people will kind of pick it up out of that. More and more it's becoming digital, and you're seeing a huge percent change versus 2019. In-store touch digital signage in particular, up 8.6, smartphone apps, up 7.1. Americans are going digital. The number one question I get from retailers is, can they cut the circular today? And the answer is, probably in about 2 to 3 years. We're getting really, really close. So to kind of summarize this up, we went through an awful lot in terms of what the American markets look like, how people buy, how they use it, how they eat. But the first thing I'd say is focus on winning in new channels. So US grocery's not done, it's still growing, there are still phenomenal retailers, but the growth is faster in discount and club and mass. The Walmarts, Targets, Costco's, winning in there with the right kind of products, the right volume is really, really gonna matter. Bringing in new households, there's still room to go bring in new households eating grapes. And part of it is you're seeing the American families change all the time. Bringing in a few new households will do incredible amounts to help continue to drive your growth in end markets. Social media and digital is a big, big thing. TikTok, there are so many brands that would kill to have all the coverage you got on the frozen grapes. I know it's ridiculous to kind of think about from my side, I know. Can you make that happen? But the more you spend money on social media and digital and capture the younger generations, like wow, it pays off. Up 17 is huge. There still are really, really big opportunities in food service to grow grapes. We see it out there. It can be bigger. The other final big thought is it's really about heavy buyers in many cases. 10% of the volume goes to 10% of the buyers go to 43% of the volume. That's a big deal. It's bigger than most categories. Knowing those buyers will pay off. And finally, new flavors. Cotton candy is up 25%. It's been going for quite a while. Keep pushing new flavors, new colors, and just bring that excitement into the American store. You've got a great product, a lot to be proud of, and frankly, I think a lot of growth ahead if you can continue to do what you're doing. So I'd like to say thank you. I appreciate the time, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask afterwards. I know we've got Jerry coming up, and happy to turn it back over.
Thank you.